many of the roads that we for recreation were put in that uranium back in the day. So it's an interesting and we also support all of the energy projects that we're trying to do around the state.
Greg Miles, Duchesne County Commissioner.
Thanks, Greg.
Tim Jimenez, House District 28. That's Tooele City and surrounding area. And I'm an environmental engineer, so I want to be here at the table anyway.
Yeah.
But I'm a good guy. I work for oil. Yeah, so I'm not an environmentalist.
Yeah, thank you. IST means a lot. Yeah, the ideology. And yeah, Representative Jimenez has got, a tremendous background to come to this. So glad to have him in the legislature and with his knowledge. So thanks for serving. Same with Ron, comes with real on the ground experience with this stuff. And we got a few other legislators I'm sure are going to be showing up. So Nikki.
Nick Thomas, Director, Oil, Gas, and Mining, State of Utah. Thanks for the opportunity to be here this morning.
So I didn't realize that John Baza had left. I knew he was planning to, so it makes sense that you'd be here. But yeah, thank you so much for coming.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
John
Google, State Auditor.
Making sure we're spending our money right here. Yeah, thank you for coming. Appreciate it.
Marcelo, that can be addressed through the oil, gas, mining, for the oil and gas program.
The policy coordinator for the division of oil, gas, mining.
Thanks for coming. You guys will get to know Titan through the session, so he's really came. Everything's all set up, so thanks, Titan, for doing that. And she's also very instrumental. Yeah. And online you could Clark Snellgrove, BYU. I don't. We'll skip the online introductions because there's a few here, and but glad to have you on. See Commissioner Sidrid there, and Representative Ship that just came in. So we're going to go ahead and turn the time over to Brian. Are you going first? Oh, Jody's gonna. Please grab a burrito in the back there or two, and Jody's gonna cut the yellow cake and kind of a first session thing. So. Okay, looks like you're all teed up there.
It's only day 3 of the session. We've got plenty of time for stress. So I'm going to try to keep it positive and not go into the doom and gloom and frustration, and just really talk about some of the positive wins going forward. So this is not. Why does it do that? Hang on. Yeah, like someone a decade or so younger than me is going to have to troubleshoot here. So the slides progress on my screen and not on. What if we? Not that many people are pre-prep. Good or this is what happens when Brian lets me go first. Sorry, folks. Let me try one more time. Okay. 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 Well, this is interesting. Sure. What is your email?
It's just W.
It's what? At least there's tape to keep you all visually.
Sylvia, do you want some cake? Okay,
Hey, you should have
I
it.
think we're good.
Very good. Rikki, that work.
Technology is great when it works. Maybe. All right. Awesome. Here. We're getting the kinks out on doing one here. Yeah, happy to get those out of the way for future. All right. So exciting news. The U.S. is now producing more oil than any country in history. This is an article from CNN from just December 23rd, I think it was. Can't quite see that. At the end of this year. So the U.S. producing 3.3 million barrels a day. EIA projects that this is going to continue into this year, the 2024. And by the end of next year, we're expected to be producing 13.5 billion barrels. So again, the largest oil producing country in the United States, outpacing all of the OPEC countries individually and combined, which is a very exciting development, despite the fact, not thanks to the fact of our federal regulatory environment, obviously. So just a little bit more about setting the stage. So this is looking at U.S. demand, and it's coming from EIA. You can see we're projecting out to 2024 there, or sorry, 2050 there. The red line on the top is petroleum or liquid fuels. The orange line that comes second is natural gas. Both of those, as you can see, are projected to continue to increase. So despite the fact that when we hear about the energy transition, we think that oil and gas is going to be declining or going away. That's certainly not the case. The third line down, the gray line, that's a little bit hard to see, is actually renewables. Renewables are also increasing here in the United States. But when we think from UPA's position of the energy transition, we actually think of it more as an energy expansion. We're going to need more energy of all types. And we see that growth out here by the EIA. I think it's also interesting to kind of break down what our fossil fuels are based on. So when we look at fossil fuel use, 94% of transportation fuels, 94% of industrial uses, 76% of residential, and 75% of commercial uses are based on fossil fuels. So when you think about the reality of it, that is such a high bar that I don't worry about my job security, to put it mildly. Globally, the picture is similar. You do see a faster growth in renewables, but again, you're also seeing growth of our traditional energy sources as well. You all know very well the idea that renewables increasing and natural gas increasing kind of go hand in glove together. We're nowhere near having industrial scale batteries. Natural gas acts as that battery at the moment to provide an ability for renewables to continue to increase. So, you know, the EIA folks know much better than me, but I would actually guess that we see that orange line increase at a little bit of a faster slope to keep up with renewables, unless we see some kind of game change in battery technology. So a little bit on LNG, and I'm sorry, this is a really busy slide, but look on the right-hand side first. So in somewhere 2015, 2017 timeline, we really had a shift in the United States where we started producing more natural gas than we consumed. And that has driven significant growth in the export market. So if you move over onto the left-hand side, what those gray bars are that make that nice curve that we always all hope to see for every presentation is the increase in natural gas exports from the United States. And it's really quite an amazing story. We did not even start exporting natural gas as a country until about 2014, 2015. The U.S. has become the largest natural gas exporter in the world in under a decade. Just an amazing story. And also, of course, with geopolitical concerns as they are, really, really beneficial in terms of our national security and our geopolitical negotiating power, helping our allies in Europe and in Asia be able to have the energy that they need as well. So similarly, this is LNG exports, and you can just see that in a little more detail. Traditionally, Australia and Qatar were the largest LNG exporters. We beat them this year in 2023. So now we are, again, the largest oil producer, the largest natural gas producer, and the largest exporter of LNG. All right. And again, I'm preaching to the choir a little bit here, but obviously oil and gas are vital in everything that we do. I was telling Representative Jimenez this morning a story that I was at the dentist last week, and I'm surrounded by lots of plastics and lots of things. And the dental hygienist is asking me why we can't move the refineries. So I think we still have a long way to go in trying to explain to people how ubiquitous oil and gas are in everything that we do in our modern daily lives. I think the other interesting thing is you'll see up there solar panels and windmills. Those are dependent on natural gas, and not just from a reliability point of view, but in terms of materials for their construction as well, and also transportation. There's just a real, I think, lack of understanding of the integrated nature of our energy industry for a lot of the general public. And we still have a long way to go on trying to educate people about those realities. But our belief, again, is that anything that increases U.S. energy production domestically is a benefit for the United States, for the state of Utah. And we are in all of the above type of organization. So bringing it back home to Utah. So 2022 was a very exciting year. 2023, we don't have the data yet for, but it will be an even more exciting year. 2022 was a record-breaking year. We produced more oil in the state here than we have ever done before, and we moved from being the 10th largest oil producer to the 9th largest oil producer. So we're catching up to Wyoming, who's next on the list above us. We'll talk a little bit more about what's driving that in a moment, but just some fun statistics over on the right, coming from a study that PwC did. In Utah, 105,000 jobs, and this is based on 2021 data. So when we see 2022 and 2023 data roll out, you're going to see significantly bigger increases. 15 billion in terms of GDP to the state, and again, it's actually significantly higher than that. These are kind of lagging indicators rather than leading indicators. So what has driven this growth? It's a busy graph. I apologize. And some of you have seen this about 1 million times, but I always think it's a good visual. I'm going to come up here a second, explain a little better. This, and let's just focus on the top half of this. We've got production here. Traditionally, the state has produced about 85,000 barrels a day, this red line of crude out of the Uinta Basin. That's what the Salt Lake refining market can take. Salt Lake refining market is about 200,000 barrels a day, but they can only take 85,000 barrels of waxy crude. That's as much as the facilities can digest, basically. So everything you see here is exports. Everything you see above that red line is product that we are now exporting out of the state. It's all new growth. New government tax, new jobs, new royalties, all new revenues, all new growth for the state of Utah. All of that is being exported via existing rail facilities that are in place today that we've been able to expand. You can also see on the bottom half of that the number of trains, the number of truckloads per day. You can see right now we are producing about 85,000 barrels a day to the Salt Lake refinery, about 65,000 barrels a day that is being exported. So in a few short years, we've almost doubled the state's oil production. I think when we see the data for 2023, we're going to have doubled the state's oil production, and Bart shaking his head, yeah. We are projecting to be between 100 and 150,000 barrels a day by the end of this year. And we have existing rail facilities that are able to accommodate that amount of export. So very exciting. What does that mean in terms of severance tax? That's the graph I'm showing you there. So you can see for like the 2016 to 2020 period, we were providing the state somewhere in the neighborhood of $30–35 million a year in severance tax. This year's numbers, fiscal year numbers from the TC23 report the tax commission puts out is almost $115 million. The numbers above that are our projections. A little bit of a disconnect as those are on an annual rather than a financial year basis, but those are based on the growth curve that I just showed you on the last slide. And the exciting thing is we have been meeting that growth curve. We've been talking to it for about 3 years now and meeting it step for step each quarter. So something in the neighborhood of those projections is definitely realistic in terms of dollars back to the state. Again, I've got that little map on the top left. All of that is going out from Duchesne down Highway 191 to Price and Helper to existing rail loadout facilities. And we are so appreciative to all of our legislators in the land for the $88.5 million that you all funded to UDOT last year and to the counties who were extremely supportive as well. We're seeing those road improvements come through on Highway 191. It's going to take some time. We've still got another year and a half-ish of work, but we're moving product down as efficiently as we could hope on that route. There are a number of speed bumps that could get in the way of this, full disclosure. We're diligently working on all of these. Federal regulations, I'm not even going to list what's happening right now, but there are literally, tens of new regulations, I would say, in the last 6 months, aside from things that are kind of general to federal lands or to, NEPA analysis and things like that. Very specific to oil and gas that are making it more difficult to produce in the U.S., more expensive to produce in the U.S., and that really risk our ability to continue this growth, especially considering the large federal footprint that we have here. Somewhere between 20 to 30% of our production is on state lands or lands that are managed or regulated by the state. The rest is tribal or federal. And that means it's under EPA's jurisdiction and federal regulations. So we are extremely susceptible to what is happening at the federal level and through EPA. Air quality is a big challenge out in the basin. We hear a lot about it up here, about the air quality challenges along the Wasatch Front. We also have an ozone problem in the Uinta Basin. It's a winter problem, but we are out of attainment. We are working hard at that. We have made some very significant reductions in our ozone precursor emissions. UPA has a program that we've stood up called Latch the Hatch, where producers are making significant investments in facility controls, aerial flyovers, finding and fixing leaks immediately. And we're making progress, but it's a challenging situation. Road and market access, of course, continues to remain a challenge. There's certainly only a limited amount of crude that we're going to be able to truck down Highway 191. And as we approach, 150,000 barrels a day going down that, I think we're probably getting close. So we've got to come up with some other alternatives of how to get out to markets of what that road can handle. And then infrastructure is a huge challenge. We do not have enough natural gas pipelines in the basin. As production has grown, we are really struggling with natural gas offtake. It seems easy to just build more pipelines, but as you all know, building anything is very, very challenging these days. And the patchwork out there means you are going to be crossing federal land and you're going to be crossing tribal land, and those two parties have to be able to negotiate and work together to get those facilities permitted. And that has proven to be a challenge. We've made some headway. Mountain West was recently acquired by Williams. They've done a great job in providing some capacity increases that have been very helpful. But this is going to be an ongoing challenge. We actually have producers that, because of the air quality challenges out there, have zero flaring commitments that have had to shut in wells because they simply will not flare when they don't have pipeline capacity for their offtake of their gas. So it's a very real challenge today. Electrification is going to be the next big challenge as we see the federal regulations rolling in. The way we're going to reduce our air emissions and meet our ozone standard is going to be through electrifying the basin. It's a very remote area. Even if we could afford all of the transmission that would be needed, we don't have the electrons. Moon Lake is struggling just to have enough power to meet current needs. So electrification is not something that we are coming to the legislature for support on this year, but I suspect it will be in future years to help us build out infrastructure. And then water reuse, I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end, but that's something we're focused on this year in terms of legislation that Representative Lund is running to help us reuse produced water and be more conservative with our freshwater resources. Waste disposal is going to be a big challenge. The division, BART, has been working with the DEQ folks to try and parse out who's going to be responsible for what, but that's going to bring some changes. And as we have more production, we have more wastes, and that gets to be challenging. Workforce, always a challenge, as it is across any industry, but particularly, and I'm sure Brian's going to say the same thing, particularly in the mineral, natural gas, oil mining industries, where young people are just not wanting to come in, and creating a pipeline is something that we're working hard at to attract those folks to our industry. So speaking of workforce, I've got a few slides that are really not very exciting, and it's early, and I apologize, and I'll breeze through them. But we've got a lot. You would love this, right? We've got a lot of these reports on our website. They're all publicly available. So if you want more detail on, GDP, on jobs, how it breaks down by county, all of that is available on our website. What I really like is the multiplier effect here on jobs. See if I can get the cursor. This 3.4, and it varies. We've got two different studies done by PwC, full disclosure. One has 3.4 multiplier, one has 4.1 multiplier. It's kind of how you slice and dice the numbers. But these are really, really high paying jobs. So when the oil and gas industry is thriving, our service companies are thriving, our grocery stores are thriving, our hotels, our restaurants are thriving. And for the basin communities, that's critically important. Again, a different report. It's available on our website called A County Look at the Oil and Gas Sector in Utah. What I think is really exciting about this is the difference between the left chart, which is 2021, and the right chart, which is 2022. For the first time, I believe ever, the oil and gas industry is generating more fees and taxes from Uintah County than from Salt Lake County. Salt Lake has always led the way because it includes the refineries. So it's just a kind of demonstration of the flip, perhaps a little bit between the upstream side and downstream side, and the direct fiscal benefit being contributed by which half of the industry. If you take the Uintah and Duchesne County amounts together, significantly more than the amount that is being produced out of Salt Lake County. The challenge here, though, is that despite those really big numbers for the basin, most of that does not stay in the basin. It's generated from the basin and goes into the state's general fund, despite a number of earmarks. And as we talk about that level of production growth, there are very real impacts to the counties. Roads are a huge challenge. The way that we produce wells now is in a much more consolidated and dense manner, where we have multiple wells on a single pad that are producing significantly more product. So that means more trucks coming into and out of a single facility. And based on where we're developing, we're also more in neighborhoods. Again, it's very challenging for communities dealing with that amount of traffic, heavy haul traffic, and what they're doing to the roads. So one of the things we've been working with Duchesne and Uintah counties on, and with Senator Winterton, is how we can try and allocate a small portion of that severance tax growth back to the counties to help support these needs. That has been an uphill battle, I don't know if we're going to get there this year or not. That's some ideas we're working on, but anything you can do to help support that message that the counties need to be able to keep some of these dollars. They have very real impacts that have a financial implication associated with them would be much appreciated. I also just wanted to show where some of those dollars go. So these are funds that have been impacted by the oil and gas sector. This is the last 5 years, 18 to 22. Again, when we start getting in 23 and 24 data, these numbers are going to grow significantly. But when we look across that 5-year period, we're talking about more than $2 billion back to the state of Utah across all of these different funds. So again, for the legislators in the room, it's not just the general fund. It's not just the conservation fee that the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining. It's across the board.
And it's kind of the whole premise of the Yellowcake Caucus was the counties. You've got these producing counties that are a lot of expenses. They're facing all the battles. They don't have a lot of resources. All those things flow to the state, and then the legislature divvies those out based on
a democratic process of who gets the most votes. So the ones that are really producing counties have the least amount of representation at the state level. So we're always trying to, communicate to the agencies that these counties need support. We get lawsuits, and again, former county commissioner San Juan County, and San Juan County goes up to fight a lawsuit against the environmental. It's really important setting precedents for the state. We're doing it. It used to be more around the state's been really great to step in a little bit more heavily. It still seems really a disadvantage in the rural counties with all of the responsibility, but none of the control or money that comes with it. So I appreciate you pointing that.
Completely agree, and that's something that I don't think is going to be solved in a single year, but it's a message that we're happy to continue to support and try and educate on. Just wrapping up here, last slide with numbers, sorry. This is CITLA's annual report that just came out. The numbers are really small, really hard to read, but oil and gas has traditionally been the single largest revenue stream for CITLA. And in the last year, we nearly doubled our revenues into CITLA. So we're just under 80 million a year. Last year it came in at 41.5 million. So again, financial numbers are really lagging indicators of what's coming. We've seen the production growth increase. In the next couple of years, you're going to see significant additional dollars coming to the state from the oil and gas industry. And it's really prime time to talk about that, about where those growth dollars should go and how they should be best utilized, because it's all new money. The argument that we've heard in the past is that you're taking away from somebody else's budget if we reallocate this. And in this case, this is all new money. So a few things that we're supporting this year, and I'll run through these really, really quickly. I know Brian is going to run through some of his as well, and we coordinate very closely. If you've got bills that you want us to support, I don't have them on here, doesn't mean we're not supporting them. I was just trying to be very quick. But our top priority this year is HB 295 with Representative Lund produced water amendments. We have been socializing this since the summer. The division has been involved, the state engineer's office, DEQ. We've been to the water task force twice with this bill. We have worked it about to death, I think. But what this bill does is it says when you have produced water, so highly saline water that comes up together with oil and gas, you do not need a water right to use it for an oil and gas activity that is non-consumptive. So we can use that water to frack. It ends up back in formation exactly as it would if we were just to put it down a saltwater disposal well, which we do today, which the division already regulates. It's just clarifying that you do not need a water right for that. What that does is free up considerable fresh water. We use fresh water for fracking today, which is completely unnecessary. We should be using our produced water, and this helps give some regulatory certainty to producers to make the investment to do so. We've got one company, XCL, that has already started doing this, and they have been able to replace 75% of their fresh water with produced water in frac. This is very real water savings. Yeah. So several other upper Colorado River Basin states already do this. So further than this and say, sorry, lower basin. Yeah. So we've got Oklahoma that does, I believe Texas does, New Mexico does, Colorado, and then we start going to Upper Basin, North Dakota, Montana. Every other major oil and gas producing state already either allows for or explicitly requires produced water to be used to save freshwater resources. We've had a lot of discussions with the state engineer's office on this. Teresa is comfortable. So I get the concern 100%, but, you know, and Bill's in the room here, but this is water that was not included in the original allocation of those Colorado regulations. This is water that is distinctly separate. It's not part of the hydrological cycle. It was never included when those allocations were made in the first place. And yes, it's going to be something we definitely have to navigate as we work through that process with the other states. But I think we've gotten the language to a place where the water community is comfortable. Another one, HB 124, high cost infrastructure development tax credit amendments. Brian really gets the credit for this, but the key point that's extremely beneficial for us is it's going to allow for emission reduction projects to take advantage of that credit. As we look at the federal rulemakings that are coming down, we are going to be investing millions and millions and millions of dollars on electrification, on controls, and being able to take advantage of this will be very, very helpful. HB 59, Representative Ivory's federal funds contingency planning. We think this is really important. We certainly want to take advantage of federal dollars as they come down, but I think we need to be really careful about what strings are attached with that. Sometimes you see that with the division with some of the orphaned and abandoned well funding that came through and some of the strings attached that might not be in line with the way that Utah wants to manage their program. So I think that's a great bill. And then we are working with Representative Wilcox, HB 142, on railroad drone amendments. His bill is not really focused on critical infrastructure and drone use, but it opens up that chapter. We have asked him to include language that would not allow private drones flying over critical infrastructure facilities. We've had a lot of challenge with that lately, with NGOs or other groups buzzing or surveilling our facilities. It's a safety issue. It's a security issue. It messes with cathodic protection. So I hope you will see that in the bill that comes out this afternoon in committee, but I haven't seen the language yet. Yeah. Yeah. It seems to be a little bit of a loophole that they feel would be better to be tightened up. Some other states have run similar legislation, Mississippi, for example, a few others, but you know, there's things you can do under the trespassing statutes, but it's got some holes that I think we can tie up. Unless you fly your drone over it. Yep. Yeah, we specifically excluded law enforcement, first responders, and regulatory agencies. Yeah.
Rikki, the family infrastructure.
It is. So federally under the CISA list, it's there, but also the definition that we're tying to is from a bill Representative Albrecht ran last year.
Okay. Yeah, we were supportive of that one.
Yeah. And it's listed in 76.6.106 for those that want to see the list. It's a pretty expansive list of what qualifies as critical infrastructure. And I've taken up more of Brian's time than I should have, as usual. But I just want to say, despite all of the doom and gloom and regulatory challenges, which are very, very real, Utah is growing nationally. We're in a leadership role, and Utah really does stand to play an important piece of the puzzle of how we're going to provide energy security nationally and maintain a geopolitical position that's advantageous for the country. So thank you guys for your support. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So yeah, as usual, Rikki's taking up a bunch of my time, but all right. So I just want to go over some quick stats, and again, these are sort of lagging indicators. Some of this data is from a couple years ago, but mining in Utah. When we're talking here, this is just the minerals side of this, not the oil and gas. $7.7 billion GDP contribution in 2022. We had $4.7 billion of mineral production, 57,000 direct and indirect jobs. We actually again think that's low. And on average, we're paying 46% higher wages than the Utah average. But again, when you get into the rural counties, those go up quite substantially. So, for example, in Representative Lyman's county, it's about 98% higher in mining than the average county wage. And some of the central Utah counties, you're getting above 100%. So they're really the best paying jobs that are available in rural Utah. So Utah ranks 8th for non-fuel mineral production, 12th for coal production. We actually dropped a little bit on that. We'll talk about that more later in the presentation. And also, I think this is very important that Utah is ranked 4th globally in what's called the Fraser Institute's Policy Perception Index. So this is a survey that they do every year that they go around to mining executives and say, hey, where do you guys basically want to go? Where do you think has the best policies for mining? And we're actually 4th globally. The only other U.S. state that beats us is Nevada, and hopefully we'll get there and then get above those guys. I want to talk that. So I'm basically going to talk about two things. One is I want to talk about critical minerals, and second, I want to talk about energy issues. The reason I have this slide is that the idea about critical minerals, and this was actually identified in a critical mineral report that the Utah Geological Survey put up. That this isn't a new concept. We didn't just come up with the critical minerals list. We've actually been doing this since the early 1900s. And in fact, in World War II, there was World War I rather, it was developed what was called a war minerals list, and that actually had tin, nickel, platinum, nitrates, and potash. And most of those are actually still considered critical today, but those were things that were considered critical to the war effort. And so we've been making these lists for a very long time. And we've gotten a lot of attention on this because in 2018, President Trump put out an executive order for the U.S. Geological Survey to come up with a critical minerals list, which they've done. There was an update to that that came out in 2018. There was an update in 2022, and this basically, put forward a list of minerals that were considered critical for our economic and national security. The problem we're having now is that, frankly, that list isn't as comprehensive as we wish that it was. And now we actually have multiple competing other federal lists. So the Department of Energy has a critical materials list. The defense logistics agencies have, their critical stockpile lists. And so there's a lot of different parts of the federal government that are determining what's critical and what's not. And even the list that we have from USGS, which is kind of the primary list, has, I think, been subject to some political machinations, which I don't think is particularly useful. And I actually want to talk about a few things that hit Utah. So when that 2020 or the 2018 list came out, there were 35 critical minerals on that list. We determined that we actually had the presence, UGS determined that we had the presence of about 28 of those 35 critical minerals in some form or fashion in Utah. When the 2022 list came out, there were actually 4 Utah critical minerals that were kicked off the list. So one of them was uranium. That was actually kicked off through legislative action, helium, potash, and rhenium. And I just wanted to illustrate sort of, how problematic this is, because literally within weeks of the updated USGS list coming out, Russia invaded Ukraine. And all of a sudden we had a major spike in the price of uranium. We've had, massive uranium supply problems since then. We had a spike in the price of helium, and helium's a very important. The second largest use of helium is actually for semiconductor manufacturing. And as you know, with the COVID pandemic, we've had a huge shortage, and for a short time there was a worldwide shortage of semiconductor chips. On the potash side, between Russia and Ukraine, they're one of the largest, the two of the largest producers of potash in the world, and so we've had potash shortages. And so just within a couple of weeks, you sort of saw the difficulty of, you know, the government sort of taking a backward-looking approach to say these are what our critical minerals are, and then all of a sudden, you know, world events intervened to show that it was probably a bad idea to kick some of these minerals off the list. The other problem too is that there are a lot of critical minerals or minerals that where we're reliant on foreign imports, and you know where we could do a lot more to produce these minerals here in the U.S. and especially here in Utah. The U.S. Geological Survey also puts out every year what's called their mineral commodity summary, and that's a very large list of different mineral commodities that are necessary for various types of manufacturing and for national security implications. On that list, there are actually 51 minerals that we are more than 50% dependent on foreign imports. So 51 minerals where we're more than 50% dependent on foreign imports. And just on that list, 20 of those minerals we either have current production, or we have known resources, or we have significant historical production. So 20 of those 51. And if you think about that, that's just one Western state. And if you put in all of our other Western states, all the other parts of the U.S. where we have these great mineral commodities, we could really do a lot to minimize our dependence on foreign imports. And again, that the largest mineral producer of critical minerals over the past number of years has been China. We also have other foreign producers, you know, Russia, countries in Africa that have, you know, very problematic labor and environmental standards. And so it really isn't doing anybody any good for us to not be producing these minerals that we could be producing here. These are just some of the minerals that, you know, we have amazing opportunities to develop more here in the U.S. if we're allowed to do that. So the next thing I want to sort of transition over to talk a little bit about energy. So I'm sure you guys have heard plenty of, you know, things on grid reliability and energy availability over the last little while, because we really are having a problem here. This was actually from one of the FERC commissioners in a hearing in the Senate early last year. So the United States is heading for reliability crisis, and he doesn't use that for melodrama, but because it's an accurate description of what's going on today. So I mean, this isn't, you know, people that do this all day long being, you know, alarmist about it. It's because we actually have problems here. This is a map from another federal agency, NERC, that deals with electric reliability. And you can see here the only color you want on this map is gray. And you can see that the most of the U.S. is not in gray. Most of the U.S. is either in orange, which is bad, or in red, which is really, really bad. And of course, you know, here we are in Utah, and we're in the orange. And so this basically means that if there's any type of disruption on the system, and that could be a weather event, that could be a wildfire, that could be, you know, a facility breakdown, you know, going offline, that could actually trip us into a situation where we have grid shortages, which means that you could potentially have rolling brownouts. And then again, obviously the red is just, you know, they're kind of up a creek, frankly. These are when you can actually have shortages even when you don't have any sort of disparities on the system. Just the demand and supply is just out of balance generally. And so this is obviously not good. It's not good for us. I mean, part of the reason that we've had the amazing growth in Utah is because we have very inexpensive and reliable energy, and we need to figure out how to maintain that. One of the challenges we have, and I'll go through these slides quickly, but one of the major challenges we have right now is that despite the federal government on the one side with FERC and NERC saying, hey, you know, we've got a reliability crisis here, on the EPA side, they're in their own little bubble and just have, you know, are doing everything they possibly can do to make that reliability crisis worse. So you guys have heard a lot about the Good Neighbor Rule, the Ozone Transport Rule. Luckily, this is something that's been held up in most of the country by various circuits, and we expect at some point this will go to the Supreme Court. So luckily this is sort of on pause right now, but it's definitely not off the books, and it's going to have to continue to be litigated. But this would lead to a massive reduction in the amount of power that we can generate, especially through coal-fired power plants. The other thing that we need to worry about is what we're calling Clean Power Plan 2.0. The original Clean Power Plan was put on hold by the Supreme Court soon after it came out back during the Obama administration. This is sort of the second version of that. And this doesn't just target coal plants, this also targets natural gas plants. And frankly, it'll probably shut down as many, if not more, than natural gas plants than it will coal plants. And this basically is putting emission reduction targets or sort of mandating technologies that haven't been demonstrated at commercial scale in such a way that, again, it's going to shut down a significant portion, if it's allowed to go into effect, of the baseload generation that we have in this country. Again, this is a plan to take all that grid reliability crisis that we're in right now and just accelerate it, the pedal to the metal. And then also through various other regulatory schemes, mostly dealing with air quality. I don't want to get into all this stuff, but the EPA is basically trying to dial up all of the air quality standards to a point that it would be nearly impossible, not just again for coal plants, but also for natural gas plants, also for manufacturing facilities, and also in some cases just for states that even have naturally occurring ozone and other things to meet these standards. I mean, again, this is an opportunity for us to really see our economic growth and our grid really be in a very, very bad way. So I want to talk specifically about some of the things that we are doing here in Utah and that we need to do here in Utah to at least do what we can to protect ourselves. The first thing, and this is something that the legislature is very focused on this year, but it's what I'm calling plant protection. We need to protect our generating plants. We've got amazing generation resources. We've got some of the largest and best run, best maintained, most efficient coal-fired generation anywhere in the country here. And we've got to maintain those plants if we want to maintain our energy independence. And the legislature is working definitely on the Intermountain Power Plant side. There's bills that are going to be coming out on that, and potentially even on the Hunter and Huntington side, to provide some opportunities for the state to ensure that we're not letting those investments go to waste and we're not seeing premature retirements. Now, the second part of this is what I'm calling producer protection. And this is something that hasn't gotten as much attention because it's really great to have a coal-fired power plant. There's some of the best ways you can possibly generate electricity. But if you don't have coal to put into that plant, then they're white elephants, right? And so we need to make sure that our coal industry is also healthy and that our producers are healthy. A large part of this is making sure that they have rational contracts. And even some of our utilities are waking up to the fact that, some of the things they've done on the contracting side has not been healthy for the coal producers and therefore has not been healthy for them in the long term. And we're starting to see some, adjustments there, but also there needs to be the ability for the Public Service Commission and other regulatory bodies to also come in and have some stronger requirements as to what coal contracts need to look like so that, we don't get into these sort of artificial, hey, there's a model that shows that this thing over here is cheaper. And so we're going to, force the producers to give a really low cost contract that's frankly not sustainable. Also, the vast majority of the coal that we mine in the state today is federal coal, but we are getting into some opportunities to mine Sitla coal, which again, following on what Rikki was showing on her chart there, I mean, this brings massive benefit to the school kids, and also it brings a huge benefit to the producers because then you're in a state permitting process versus a federal permitting process, which has gotten more and more difficult over the years. It was always difficult, and it's just gotten more difficult. And so the more we can get into Sitla coal, we have opportunities to do this with the opening of, what we're calling the Fossil Rock mine. There's a huge tract in the Lilac Canyon mine that hopefully will get transferred over to the state this year, in the Bronco mine. So there are opportunities to do this, but we need to make sure that those stay on track. Another thing, too, is that we talked about this at the beginning of the governor's administration, and then it kind of disappeared, and I don't know why. But the idea of having fuel reserves is a really, really good idea. So, Utah's a place where, you talk about having your year's supply and all of that, and yet we don't have any type of a supply for the fuels that actually keep our economy going. Right now, depending on who you talk to, there's some people that say we have about a 2-week supply of coal. Some people say that it's about 7 weeks, but regardless, that's not enough. So we should really have a lot of coal on the ground, and coal is so great because you can store it very, very easily. So, you can either put a big pile on the ground and you can cover it up, or you can put a big pile on the ground and you do a very minimal amount of pile maintenance, and you can store it for a very long time. And having the ability to have that type of a reserve on the ground, I think if we had had that, if we had developed this back when we had started talking about it, then we probably wouldn't be in some of the coal supply problems that we have right now. The other issue is that, our producers need to be protected from imports from out of state. We have seen imports that right now we're unfortunately importing some coal just because we don't have enough in the basin, which is unfortunate. But, in the long term, we have enough opportunities in our reserves to produce what we need, but we need to make sure that, we're not being forced into competition with out-of-state producers that, either have lower quality coal or again are going to cut contracts that are, problematic for our folks. And then the last thing I'll talk about is exports. So, right now, again, we're having trouble supplying what we need here for our power plants and other uses in state. But long term, the ability to export on the international markets is really important for our coal producers, because because we have really, really good, high quality, low sulfur, high BTU, low ash coal, it commands a premium on the international markets. And so therefore, that's a nice, it's a good growth market for our coal, but also it's a nice way to balance some of the more stable but lower cost contracts that our producers have. And one of the big things that I think you see from, what Rikki talked about on her presentation, when you have the opportunity to exploit those export opportunities, the producers will find a way to produce that commodity, right? And the problem we're having is that, those opportunities for the coal on the coal side have largely been foreclosed because of port capacity. So we just have a very, very, we're basically exporting as much coal now as we can, given the port capacity that we have access to, but that is very limited. And so if we can find a way to have access to more export opportunities and more port capacity, a coal producer only exists to produce coal. And so if you give them the opportunities to have rational contracts and to have the customer base and to have export opportunities, they will find ways to produce that coal. And I think that eventually you will see that same growth curve. And I know that this sounds crazy because everybody's been saying for 15 years that the coal industry is dead, but I think that if you find these opportunities, that you will see that same kind of growth in terms of the production numbers that we're seeing on the oil and gas side. But we have to provide the producers with those opportunities. That's part of why it's so important what the state has done to set aside money for a deep water coal port. And that's something that we're working on. We're actually hoping to take a proposal to the CIB board in the next number of months to actually to invest in a deep water terminal that could help us secure that export market for our coal producers. So I'll just end by saying, just going over some of the legislation that we're looking on. First of all, I would recommend to you, it's not legislation, but everybody go back to the November PUET meeting and look at the final report for the feasibility of the Intermountain Power Plant, which was produced by a national expert. It gives a great overview of what we can potentially do with that plant if the state intervenes to save it, which I believe that they're going to do this session. And the Intermountain Power Amendments are part of that effort. Rikki talked a little bit about the high-cost infrastructure tax credit. I'll just say that the emission reduction piece is really important on that, but also, again, that this incentivizes mineral production facilities. And so not only do we need to mine more here in Utah and in the U.S., but we also need to process and refine and smelt more of our minerals, because if we're producing the mineral, but then we have to send it off to China or somewhere else to have it be processed, then we haven't really fixed the problem. Mineral amendments is actually an expansion of the mineral production or the mineral exploration tax credit that we passed 2 years ago. This just passed through Senator Winterton's committee yesterday. And so this just expands the different types of facilities and commodities that are eligible to take advantage of that. The Clean Energy Amendments is basically a small change to the state code that allows nuclear and pumped hydro and geothermal to be counted as clean energy production. And this came out of an energy working group that I was on over the last year. And then the Utah Energy Act amendments, and this essentially just forces the Office of Energy Development to engage in some longer term planning and modeling to ensure that, we understand not only what our energy situation is today, but also what it needs to be in 5 years and 10 years and 20 years and 30 years, and have a better strategy for dealing with that. There's lots of other legislation that I'm sure you guys will hear about and be involved with, but these were just some of the ones, some of the bills that I wanted to highlight. And just thank you guys for your support and everything you're doing. So, Bill. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And that also, so there was a really great, the UEOC, the Unified Economic Opportunity Commission, had an energy working group, and some of the recommendations that came out of that were, again, for the high cost infrastructure tax credit bill, mineral amendments bill, but also for some funding for Utah Geological Survey, to help you guys finalize some of your and expand some of your commodities mapping and other things. So I was grateful that that was something we were able to get a recommendation through the UEOC for. So yeah, I think that it's good that we have so much focus on energy and minerals right now, but it's also something where we have to be smart about the types of the ways we're handling these things, and making sure also that we're promoting good policy regardless of where the minerals are found in the state, and the minerals that are over here don't get treated differently than the minerals that might be in a more sensitive part of the state or on the Great Salt Lake or somewhere else. So we just got to make sure that we're promulgating good policy across the board. So thank you.
That was great, and I appreciate you coming, and we could talk about this every week, and it wouldn't be a waste of time. So thanks for the information. I know other people have meetings that are started, so I won't go into any great detail. Next week, we're going to be talking quite a bit about natural asset companies and kind of the threat that poses. The Blue Ribbon Coalition is planning on being here. I believe that Marlo, the treasurer's, plan to come, and then I've got some stuff on that. I guess brief the folks on. Bill, it's good to have you join us. Appreciate that. And with that, we'll call it the end of the session, end of the first meeting. Thank you. End of this session. Thank you all.